Welcome to the Hindu Daily. Today, we are looking at the massive sort of hidden infrastructures that keep our society running and, the systemic risks that are threatening to tear them down.
Yeah, it's a really broad spectrum today. We are going to explore everything from the literal bedrock of the earth to the biological hardware of your own body.
Exactly. And we are starting right now with the blueprint for India's future, specifically the infrastructure of higher education.
Right, which is in a massive state of flux right now.
Oh, completely. If you look at the current national targets, there's this massive push to take the gross enrollment ratio, or GER, in higher education up to 50%.
And just for context, right now it sits at, what, 29.5%?
Yeah, exactly, 29.5. So to get to 50, the country has been building at just a frantic pace. I mean, we've seen the number of higher educational institutions jump from roughly 51,000 a decade ago to over 70,000 today.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right. But here is the critical realization that policymakers are finally waking up to. Pouring concrete and adding seats does not magically create students.
It really doesn't. And there is a popular assumption that the main barrier keeping young people, especially in second and third tier towns out of higher education, is a lack of aspiration.
Like they just don't care to go.
Exactly. People assume they just don't want to go. But the data flips that narrative completely. Aspiration is incredibly high across the board. The real binding constraint, the thing actually stopping them, is the sheer cost, frankly, the terrifying risk of participation.
Right, because it is a risk.
A huge one. I mean, education undoubtedly transforms lives, but that transformation only happens when access, affordability, and academic quality intersect. For millions of young Indians today, pursuing higher education represents a massive, highly risky financial gamble for their entire family.
Okay, so let's unpack the mechanics of that risk.
Yeah.
Because the traditional knee-jerk answer from governments is usually, just offer more scholarship.
Right. Throw money at it.
Exactly.
Yep.
But reading through today's editorial, we really need to reframe how we view that solution. Currently, most scholarships are treated like handing out bus tickets.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah, they are just a one-off financial plug-in for a single year.
Right.
But what the higher education sector actually needs is to build a reliable highway system.
Mm-hmm.
Scholarships need to be engineered as embedded structural pathways that carry a student all the way through, not just, peripheral add-ons.
Right, structural pathways.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If we take taxpayer money and just pour massive amounts of it into these highway scholarships, how do we ensure we aren't just funding dropouts? I mean, if we guarantee the money, what's keeping the student motivated to actually succeed?
Well, you're touching on the exact reason why the structural design of the scholarship matters infinitely more than just the dollar amount on the check.
Okay, how so?
The necessary shift here is moving toward multi-year commitments rather than these stressful, conditional annual renewals. Think about what it does to a student's psychology when they have a multi-year guarantee.
It probably takes a huge weight off.
Exactly. You provide academic stability. You completely remove that constant low-level panic of, will my family be able to afford my tuition next semester? When you remove that cognitive load, they can actually focus their mental energy on learning.
Which naturally reduces dropout rates.
Right. And what is really fascinating here is that India doesn't need to look to the West for this model. The historical precedent is literally ancient.
Wait, really? Like how far back?
If you look back to the ancient Indian institution of Takshashila, students there had 5 distinct, structured ways to pay for their education. It wasn't just a binary of pay up front or leave.
Oh, wow. 5 ways.
Yeah. They could pay in advance, sure, but they could also work for their teachers. They could legally defer payment until after graduation. They could receive regional funding from their specific communities, or they could rely on established charitable support.
So the underlying principle thousands of years ago was already established. Ability should never be turned away simply because of a lack of immediate means. And it's encouraging because we are seeing modern versions of this ecosystem working today. If you look at Ashoka University, they evaluate a student's financial aid completely independent of their academic admission.
Which is how it should be.
Right. Because of this strictly need-sensitive process, about 20% of their students are currently on full free rides. Or look at the Indian School of Business, ISB. They are using scholarships not just as a charity mechanism, but as a core tool for community building.
How are they doing that?
Well, they specifically target people from the armed forces or the development sector, essentially using financial aid to curate a more diverse, robust classroom.
That is a profound shift in mindset. And if we zoom out and connect this to the broader socioeconomic picture, building systemic pathways instead of just handing out occasional aid is the exact same philosophy currently driving India's evolution in women's empowerment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we are witnessing a massive nationwide transition from simply providing women with access to establishing actual economic and political authority.
The scale of this infrastructure shift is staggering. For you listening, I really want you to visualize these numbers.
Yeah.
We are talking about 57 core Yandan bank accounts, and over 55% of those are held by women.
Which is a massive paradigm shift.
It is. Imagine a rural household where, historically, the male head of the family controlled all the cash. Suddenly, the mother has her own bank account, her own passbook, her own PN. That fundamentally shifts the power dynamic.
Right.
Plus, you have nearly 10 crore women organizing into self-help groups. 10.5 crore households have been reached by the Ujjwala scheme for clean cooking fuel. That alone is freeing up millions of hours previously spent foraging for wood.
Yeah, time poverty is a huge issue.
Exactly. And close to 70% of MUDRA entrepreneurial loans are going directly to women.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't just a social project. This has pushed the female labor force participation rate up to nearly 37%.
It is a complete structural redesign of the grassroots economy. I mean, we have to stop viewing these women as welfare recipients. They are now primary drivers of macroeconomic growth. But this rapid expansion raises a critical question for the next decade.
Right.
The challenge is no longer about sitting in a room and creating the policy. The bottleneck now is policy penetration and last-mile delivery. How do you ensure that absolutely no eligible woman is left behind due to bureaucratic friction?
And that is precisely where the Nari Shakti Vandanatiniam comes into play. It is being framed as the ultimate legislative tool to bridge that execution gap.
Because it actively expands women's representation in legislative bodies.
Yeah, think about how policies are usually made, mostly by people completely disconnected from the problem. I want you to imagine what happens when the people who are actually experiencing these harsh community realities,
Right.
the women who are navigating the broken rural healthcare systems, the ones running the local self-help economies, are the actual lawmakers designing the policies.
It completely rewrites the targeting, the efficiency, and the adoption of these programs.
Yes.
It creates a powerful self-reinforcing loop. More women in leadership naturally leads to more responsive, reality-based policy. That responsive policy drives higher economic participation at the grassroots, which, in turn, builds a much stronger, wider pipeline of future female leaders.
But, and here's where the reality check comes in. While we are working incredibly hard to expand political access for women at the grassroots level, the absolute highest levels of political power in India are still heavily bottlenecked by an entirely different kind of infrastructure.
Ah, right.
And that infrastructure is money.
Yeah, the underlying mechanics of Indian elections are staggering when you look at the sheer unfiltered cost. Recent data reveals that 93% of India's members of parliament are corruptous.
Wow, 93%.
Individuals possessing assets worth tens of millions of rupees. When wealth is that highly concentrated in the legislature, it begs the fundamental question of whether a true level playing field is even mathematically possible, especially for smaller grassroots parties or independent candidates trying to break into the system.
So let's talk about the absurdity of the official spending limits versus the reality on the ground. Because officially, by law, a candidate running for a Lok Sabha seat is capped at spending 95 lakh rupees.
Which is, frankly, laughable.
It is. Anyone who has ever lived through an Indian election knows that number is a complete fiction. Actual estimates suggest that spending runs anywhere from 50 crore to 100 crore rupees per individual candidate in highly contested areas.
The discrepancy is wild.
If we look at the 2024 general elections, the official affidavits submitted to the Election Commission show the BJP reported spending roughly 1,500 crore rupees, and the Congress reported around 600 crore.
But the real numbers are much higher.
Oh, completely. Independent watchdogs like the Center for Media Studies estimate the actual total spending across the entire political board was closer to 1 lakh crore rupees.
That is more than the GDP of several small nations.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we also recently saw the Supreme Court scrap the electoral bond scheme entirely because it was fundamentally opaque. But let me push back on how we try to regulate this. If the 95 lakh rupee limit is basically an open joke, one that essentially forces every major viable candidate to rely on unaccounted black money just to stay competitive, why don't we just remove the cap entirely?
Right. Just make it a free market.
Yeah. Wouldn't removing that arbitrary limit at least pull the spending out of the shadows and make it honest?
It seems like the logical fix, but it's a brutal catch-22.
How so?
If you lift the spending caps entirely, yes, you technically allow candidates to spend more legitimate white money transparently. But you have to remember how our electoral mechanics work. We use a first-past-the-post system.
Okay.
So if there are 100 votes and you get 51 and I get 49, you take absolutely all the power. My 49 votes get me nothing.
Right. Winner take all.
Exactly. Because the stakes are winner take all, candidates will leave absolutely no stone unturned. Lifting the legal cap doesn't somehow stop the black money arms race. It just raises the baseline floor.
So they'll spend the white money and then still spend the black money.
Precisely. The core issue we are avoiding is that political money isn't just spent on legitimate campaigning like billboards and rallies. A massive hidden portion goes into unaccounted cash distribution and voter inducement.
I see.
Therefore, the legislative focus has to be on absolute transparency rather than setting arbitrary numerical limits that everyone ignores. If voters and journalists can see exactly who is funding which candidate and then watch to see if subsequent government policy decisions favorably align with those specific funders, that transparency creates its own inherent accountability.
Makes total sense. So we are essentially diagnosing the health of the democracy.
Yeah.
But I want to pivot now to the literal physical health of the population, because there is an absolute revolution happening right now in metabolic health that we need to talk about.
The GLP-1 revolution.
Yes. I want to tell you the story of a patient named Rakesh. Rakesh weighed 169 kilograms. He wasn't lazy. He had tried every restrictive diet, every brutal exercise plan, and biologically nothing worked. His body fought him at every turn.
That's a very common experience.
It really is. He was at the point where he physically could not fit into the driver's seat of his own car. But over the course of 9 months, he lost 37 kilograms.
Wow.
He can drive. Again, he's swimming. His fatty liver disease drastically improved, and his blood pressure normalized. So what changed? He started GLP-1 therapy.
Right. So GLP-1 receptor agonists, like the drug semaglutide, were originally developed and marketed strictly for managing type 2 diabetes, but they are completely transforming the global landscape of obesity care. And this is incredibly critical to understand for the Indian context.
Because of our specific biological makeup, right?
Exactly. India is currently facing a massive, rapidly growing burden of metabolic disease, and it's largely driven by a very specific biological reality that medical professionals call the thin fat phenotype.
Let's break that term down because it sounds like a contradiction. Thin fat.
It does.
The thin fat phenotype means that populations in India generally show lower rates of generalized overall obesity compared to Western countries. But they possess significantly higher body fat percentages and higher rates of insulin resistance.
Right. It's deceptive. An Indian person might look perfectly healthy or even thin in a t-shirt. They might not register as obese by standard overall body weight or traditional BMI metrics, but internally, their biology is doing something very dangerous.
Visceral fat.
Yes, they carry a much higher proportion of visceral fat. That's the fat wrapping directly around internal organs like the liver and pancreas. This makes them highly prone to developing early-onset type 2 diabetes and severe cardiovascular disease, even at lower body weights.
And that's why these drugs are so important.
Exactly. GLP-1 drugs are revolutionary because they target this exact metabolic root cause.
But historically, the barrier keeping these drugs out of people's hands has been the astronomical cost. Well, here is the massive news that just dropped. On March 22nd, Novo Nordisk's patent for semaglutide finally expired.
Which changes everything.
The pharmaceutical floodgates have officially opened. Over 50 different companies in India have now launched their own generic versions of the drug. The monthly cost, which used to crush patients at anywhere from 11,000 to 18,000 rupees, has plummeted almost overnight to around 5,000 rupees.
That is a game changer for access.
Access is exploding. But I need to be very clear about something with our listeners. Because people hear the phrase weight loss drug and instantly assume it's a cosmetic magic pill. It is absolutely not.
Far from it.
Think of a GLP-1 drug like giving your body a biological brake pedal for your appetite. It physically slows down gastric emptying, keeping food in your stomach longer, and it sends chemical signals to your brain to suppress cravings. It applies the brakes. But you are still the one driving the car. You have to steer it. If you take this drug, you must pair it with a very high protein diet and serious heavy resistance training. If you just take the medication, stop eating, and don't lift weights, your body will cannibalize itself. You will lose a severe, dangerous amount of muscle mass right alongside the fat.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Obesity is not a character flaw. It is a chronic, relapsing metabolic condition. If you stop taking the medication without having spent those months building robust muscular and dietary habits, the biological drive returns and the weight comes right back.
Right. You have to do the work.
Yeah. But, while it is incredible that we can now treat health at the individual metabolic level with advanced drugs like GLP-1, there is a broader tragedy here.
Which is?
Our physical bodies are increasingly at the mercy of massive external environmental changes that we simply cannot medicate our way out of.
You were talking about the collision of climate change and public health.
Yes.
There is a deeply sobering new report out by the philanthropy fund DASRA that maps this out, and the numbers are frightening. Nearly 40% of all Indian districts are now classified as being at high risk from extreme weather events.
40%, that's huge.
Yeah, it is. And we are just talking about an uncomfortably hot day here and there.
Yeah.
We are talking about lethal conditions. In the year 2021 alone, extreme heat waves cost India an estimated 160 billion labor hours.
That's hard to even comprehend.
Imagine an entire nation's workforce just having to down tools and stop contributing to the economy because stepping outside has become biologically dangerous.
And the health impacts of that heat are profound. And they are deeply unequal. Take pregnant women, for example. The DASRA report highlights that prolonged exposure to extreme heat is linked to a 16% increase in the odds of preterm birth.
Wait, just from the heat?
Yes. The heat physically stresses the body to the point of inducing early labor. Furthermore, as the baseline temperature of the country rises, we are seeing the geographic footprint of diseases physically shift.
Like mosquitoes moving to new areas.
Exactly. Warmer ambient temperatures mean that vector-borne diseases like dengue fever are climbing into new, higher altitudes. Take Shimla and the Himalayan foothills. Historically, those areas were simply too cold for these specific mosquitoes to survive. Now, they are seeing active dengue outbreaks.
Wow.
Yeah, climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It acts as a massive health risk multiplier.
So if you are running a hospital or a state government, how does a healthcare system even begin to prepare for an unpredictable, invisible enemy like the weather? I mean, you can't put a giant air-conditioned dome over a city.
No, you can't control the sky. But you can build systemic infrastructural resilience on the ground. We are starting to see the implementation of highly targeted heat action plans at the municipal and district levels.
What do those actually look like?
Well, these aren't vague policies. They include hyper-local early warning systems, mandating adjusted work hours for outdoor construction laborers so they aren't working at solar noon, and preparing local health clinics with the necessary supplies for sudden, massive surges in heat stroke and severe dehydration.
So it's about practical mitigation.
It is a necessary shift from debating broad global climate policy to executing highly localized, data-driven survival adaptation.
But adapting to massive, complex, fast-moving challenges like climate change requires a highly efficient, incredibly responsive government system.
Right.
You cannot fight a 21st century climate crisis if your administrative government is completely bogged down in 19th century red tape. Which brings us exactly to why India is currently trying to aggressively clear out its regulatory bottlenecks with a new Jan Vishwas bill.
Yes, this piece of legislation represents a major philosophical shift toward what is being called trust-based governance. The 2026 Jan Vishwas bill amends 784 different provisions across 79 separate central acts.
That is a massive sweep.
It is the primary overarching goal, decriminalizing minor procedural lapses. To understand why this is necessary, you have to look at the sheer scale of the legal backlog.
The pending cases.
Right. Right now, India's district and subordinate courts have a staggering 4.8 crore pending cases. And a huge chunk of these aren't murders or grand thefts. They are minor regulatory matters where a small business owner could literally face actual jail time simply for missing a paperwork filing deadline or making a technical accounting default.
It's a system that disproportionately punishes MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. Think about a local shopkeeper. They are penalized not because they are inherently corrupt or trying to cheat the system, but because they simply lack the massive legal departments and financial capacity to absorb the impact of these deeply punitive, archaic laws.
Exact.
So let me play devil's advocate again here.
Go for it.
If we take away the threat of jail time and replace it with mere administrative financial penalties, aren't we essentially just putting a price tag on breaking the law? Won't massive multi-billion-dollar corporations just view these new administrative fines as a minor cost of doing business and choose to ignore the regulations entirely because it's cheaper to just pay the penalty?
It is a completely valid concern, but it fundamentally misses the core legal principle driving the bill, which is proportionality.
Proportionality, okay.
Yes, the legislation is meticulously designed to legally separate genuine fraud, willful tax evasion, and actual corporate malice from harmless procedural noncompliance.
Ah, so it draws a clear line.
Exactly. If a corporation commits actual financial fraud, or if they endanger public safety by dumping chemicals, criminal sanctions and jail time absolutely still apply. But by channeling the harmless, victimless missed filings into an automated system of administrative fines, we stop treating a confused bakery owner like a criminal mastermind.
That makes a lot of sense.
It acts as a release valve.
Yeah.
It frees up the time and resources of those severely backlogged courts so they can actually focus on prosecuting real damaging crimes.
It makes sense when you put it like that. Our entire legal and administrative system relies on these wide margins of error, on human judgment, and on giving people the benefit of the doubt. But some systems do not have that luxury.
No, they don't.
Some systems require absolutely flawless, unforgiving precision based purely on math. Systems like human spaceflight.
Oh, yeah. The underlying mechanics of the Gaganyaan crew module re-entry are a perfect, terrifying example of this.
Terrifying is the right word.
When the Indian astronauts finally return to Earth, their orbital module will be hitting the upper atmosphere at roughly 7,800 meters per second. That is an almost incomprehensible amount of kinetic energy that has to be bled off safely without incinerating the crew inside.
And they use the Earth's atmosphere itself to do it, right?
Yeah.
The physical friction and atmospheric drag act as the primary brake, a violent process called aerobraking, slowing the module down drastically before the parachutes are even allowed to deploy at an altitude of 12 kilometers.
Exactly.
But here's a major question I had reading this. Why is ISRO planning a sea landing, splashing down in the Bay of Bengal, instead of bringing the astronauts down on solid ground the way the Russian Soyuz missions do on the steppes of Kazakhstan?
It all comes down to the brutal physics of impact. Land is completely unforgiving. In order for human beings to survive a touchdown on solid Earth without shattering their spines, the module has to be slowed down to a gentle 1 or 2 meters per second.
Okay, so just make bigger parachutes then.
Well, to mathematically achieve that drag using parachutes alone, you would need to pack a parachute 49 times larger than what they are currently designing.
49 times.
Yes. The sheer weight and volume penalty of a parachute that massive would make launching the mission impossible, and a canopy that big would likely tangle upon deployment. But water is different. It acts as a natural fluid shock absorber. A capsule can safely splash down into the sea, hitting at 7 to 9 meters per second, which is a much more manageable engineering problem.
So they aim for the ocean, but they aren't aiming for a tight little bullseye painted on the water. The projected landing footprint is this massively elongated ellipse stretching across the ocean.
Yeah, you can't pinpoint it perfectly.
Think about the mechanics of skipping a stone across a pond. The stone wants to bounce off the surface tension. Because this capsule is traveling at hypersonic speeds, hitting the atmosphere is like hitting a brick wall. Your forward momentum is so massive that any tiny fluctuation in atmospheric density can cause you to overshoot your target by hundreds of kilometers forward or backward.
Exactly.
But your lateral movement, your ability to steer left or right, is incredibly limited. You are entirely at the mercy of the physics.
Right, because spaceflight deals with the unyielding ancient physical laws of nature. But, while we are spending billions mastering the physics of orbital reentry, the entire digital infrastructure running our modern world down here on the ground is entirely man-made.
And as we are discovering, it is potentially full of hidden catastrophic flaws.
Which brings us to a really fascinating piece of business news regarding Project Glasswing and a new AI system called the Claude Mythos LLM.
Yeah, Anthropic's new project.
Exactly. Anthropic, which is a major AI research company, has built a massive, unreleased artificial intelligence model using a $100 million budget. Its specific, singular purpose is to continuously scan and read the vast, open-source code bases that essentially run the world's computers.
And the vulnerabilities it is finding are terrifying experts.
Yeah. The AI is turning up incredibly deep, previously undiscovered security vulnerabilities in foundational, decades-old software. We are talking about critical architecture like OpenBSD and the Linux kernel, the very operating systems that power the servers of global banks and governments.
Oh, wow.
The CEO of the Data Security Council of India, the DSCI, recently issued a stark warning. They are predicting an incoming tsunami of cyber attacks, not just for software as a service platforms, but for actual physical infrastructure.
Like physical machinery.
Yeah. They specifically highlight the risk to SCADA systems. For the listener, SCADA systems are the software that physically control the water pressure in your local treatment plant, the temperature in a chemical factory, and the switching stations on the national power grid. If those are breached, the damage isn't digital, it's physical.
And there is a lot of anxiety right now within the Indian tech sector because no Indian IT firm was included on the initial exclusive partner list for Project Glasswing. This is raising huge fears about our national digital exposure.
It's a huge blind spot for us right now.
But hold on, let me ask the obvious, urgent question here. If we have built an artificial intelligence that is suddenly capable of finding every hidden backdoor, every misplaced line of code, and every invisible flaw in our entire digital world, aren't we essentially just forging the ultimate skeleton key?
Yes.
Aren't we handing the ultimate lockpick to whoever manages to hack or replicate this model next?
You have just articulated the exact existential dilemma that is keeping cybersecurity experts awake at night. What we are looking at is a desperate, highly automated race between white hat patching, where the good guys use the AI to find and fix the bugs, and black hat exploitation, where bad actors use the exact same AI to find the bugs and attack them.
That is terrifying.
It is. The long-term survival of our digital infrastructure actually hinges on a massive, unresolved theoretical debate in computer science. Are software bugs fundamentally dense, or are they sparse?
What does that mean?
Well, if bugs are dense, meaning that in millions of lines of code, there's essentially an infinite number of them waiting to be found, then an AI like Mythos is a permanent, unstoppable offensive weapon that will always find a new way in.
Okay. And if they're sparse?
If bugs are sparse, meaning there are actually only a rare, finite few chinks in the armor, then using an AI to rapidly find and patch them could theoretically, eventually, lead us to perfectly secure, unhackable software.
It is a terrifying, invisible digital threat hanging over our heads. But as we wrap up, I want to connect that invisible threat to a very physical, very visible, centuries-long threat, radioactive waste.
Right. Down in Finland, humanity has just finished building the world's first permanent nuclear waste tomb.
It's called the Onkalo facility, and the scale of it is hard to wrap your head around.
It is an absolute marvel of deep-time engineering. Onkalo is located on Olkiluoto Island. They have essentially dug a spiraling tunnel 430 meters straight down into migmatite gneiss bedrock.
Why that specific rock?
To understand why they chose it, you have to know it is 1.9 billion years old. It has survived continents colliding and ice ages coming and going. It is incredibly stable and entirely waterproof.
Wow.
The facility is designed to hold 6,500 tons of highly toxic spent nuclear fuel. They seal the fuel inside massive copper canisters, lower them into the bedrock, and then pack the surrounding space with water-absorbing bentonite clay so nothing can ever move.
To give that context, globally, there are currently nearly 400,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel just sitting around on the surface of the Earth, mostly in temporary chain-link storage facilities outside power plants. Onkalo is going to take in Finland's waste slowly, year by year, until the 2120s.
And once it is full,
The tunnels will be backfilled, the entrance will be destroyed, and it will be permanently sealed off from humanity forever.
It sounds extreme, but it's important to understand that nuclear experts view deep geologic disposal, like Onkalo, as the least bad option.
As opposed to just leaving it on the surface.
Right. Are there uncertainties about exactly how fast a copper canister might corrode over 100,000 years? Yes. But leaving highly radioactive waste sitting in cooling pools or dry concrete casks on the exposed surface of the Earth leaves it incredibly vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
To plane crashes, extreme weather events, loss of electrical cooling, and intentional terrorist sabotage. Burying it deep and stable, billion-year-old bedrock completely isolates the danger from the chaos of human civilization.
It really makes you pause and think about our legacy as a species. When we spend billions of dollars to bury our most dangerous creations hundreds of meters deep, surrounded by 1.9 billion-year-old rock, we are essentially building an anti-monument.
That's like a profound way to look at it.
Every other monument in human history, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, was built to be remembered. This is an engineered tomb meticulously designed to be entirely forgotten by future generations. it makes you wonder. What other systemic problems in our modern society are we currently just trying to bury deep enough so that someone else, thousands of years from now, has to figure out how to deal with the fallout?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.